Yo, what is going on, guys? Wild Bill here, and I'm coming at you with an in-depth FRELJORD Legends of Runeterra guide. In this video, we're going to go over some strong decks that have seen lots of play in the meta. We're going to go over how to effectively use Frostbite and basically how to play FRELJORD and Frostbite effects overall. And then we're going to go into a little bit of a tier list. I'm going to give you guys my opinion as a master ranked player, what cards are good, what cards are bad, and how they work out in constructed versus expedition type decks. So if you guys want to cut the bullshit and just go to whatever section you want to most know about, here are some timestamps and where you can find the associated topic. Throughout the first season of Ranked in Runeterra, there are 5 main FRELJORD decks that have gotten pretty good competitive play. They are Ezreal Combo, War Mother, Endur Spiders, Ash Frostbite, and Trend Thresh midgame. So we're going to be talking in depth about these decks, and first off we're going to talk about Ezreal Combo. So this deck used to see a lot more play. Back when you were able to run the Elunks, this deck was a little bit better, but even now with the Poro Herder it can still work. So this deck compared to other Ezreal decks is pretty fast to flip the Ezreal because you get the targeted Icevale Archer, Avarosan Marksman, and Harsh Winds is also, and the Brittle Steels. Like, the Brittle Steels are really low cost and the Harsh Winds target 2, so I think that it relies a lot more on using your units to damage the Nexus, get it to about the 8 to 12 health range, and then you finish off the Ezreal combo. So a lot of times with this deck, what you want to do on the open of your turn is pass, let your opponent summon something if they're going to summon something, and then you play an Icevale Archer or an Avarosan Marksman. So this deck is really tempo based. You really want to make sure that you can maximize targeting enemy units. And once you play your Chump Wump, you don't want to immediately use your mushrooms. You want to save your mushrooms in general for once you flip your Ezreal. So Chump Wump is a nice blocker, but then he also adds some clunkiness to your hand because you really don't want to be using those mushrooms until later game. One thing I would do to change this deck a little bit for me personally is take out the Chempunk Pickpocket and then put in 2 or 3 Get Exciteds, because I think that the Lonely Poros and Poro Herder gives you the ability to discard more cards than you usually would be. And next we got War Mother Control. This is a super hard deck to play, but it also really depends on what's popular in the meta at the time. You have quite a few win conditions. Once you War Mother's Call, you've pretty much won. You can also trade in a Commander Ladros for Rekindler if you want, or Soul Gorgers for Rekindlers. Rekindlers are something that can work really well with this deck. One thing while playing this deck is you really want to have a good understanding of what the deck you're going up against is and what your opponent's deck wants to do. So if I'm playing War Mothers against an aggro deck that has a lot of Spiderlings, that has a lot of Brood Awakenings, that has a lot of 1 health enemies, then I'm really going to want to take the Withering Wail in my opening hand. I really want to keep that. So if I'm going against a Demacia mid-range Bannerman deck, in the opening hand, if I have a Ruination, I'm probably going to want to keep that because I can drop that on turn 6. Commander Ladros you never want to keep in your opening hand. You might want to keep a Darkwater Scourge just so you can make sure you get a little bit of health back. Grasp of the Undying is also good. Vile Feast is also good. Avalanche is also good. But cards like Vengeance, War Mother's Call, Atrocity, Ladros, Soul Gorger, those are going to be kind of later game. The key takeaway to this deck is the opening hand is very important, and you got to make sure that you play your opening hand according to what the matchup is. The next deck we have up is Endur Spiders, and I love this deck. It has so many answers to so many different types of decks. So basically, the idea behind this deck is you build a lot of early units, you get a lot of early pressure, and you don't necessarily win the game. You get the opponent's Nexus to under 10 health, and then by that time, hopefully, you will have They Who Endure, who will be pretty big by turn 7 or 8, and then you can go in for a kill. The only thing that this deck really doesn't like is Ionia because of the recall, and that's pretty much it. Like, Ionia is the one region that gives this deck a lot of trouble because of the Will of Ionia and because of Deny, because a lot of times Deny will affect either your Atrocity or Ruination. So there's a few tips on this deck. If you're playing against a Demacia mid-range big board deck, you always want to keep a Ruination in hand on the opening turn if you can. Brood Awakening is also really good in general to keep. Iceveil, if you're against an aggro deck, you want to keep a Frenzied Skitterer, you want to keep an Iceveil Archer, you want to keep Hapless Aristocrats and Vile Feasts, because those can kill the low level units while providing you either units or health. When you're playing this deck, a lot of times you'll have a lot of spiders on the board. One thing you want to be keeping in the back of your mind, especially if you're going against Piltover or if you're going against Shadow Isles, you don't want Withering Wail to mess up your day, and you don't want a Static Shock to mess up your day. If you're going against a Piltover deck, try to be careful when playing Elise on turn 2 if you can, because it's very common to play Elise on turn 2 and then get Thermo Beamed. And the last deck we're going to be discussing in this video is an Ash Frostbite Tempo deck. This deck is cool because there are 3 very distinct strategies depending on which type of matchup you're going against. Against aggro style decks, your main objective is to use Brittle Steel, Elixir of Iron, Iceveil Archer, anything that has early game value to slow down your opponent's attack. You really don't want to worry about doing damage to your opponent as much as keeping your own health up, because in the late game, you will eventually be able to outvalue your opponent with your Trifarian Assessor draw. Against mid-range type decks like Bannerman that try to build a wide board and have an end game around turn 9 or 10, the objective changes to Ash. You want to level up Ash as fast as possible, so you want Brittle Steels, you want Harsh Winds, you want Iceveil Archers, you want things to neutralize the attack, getting reasonable trades with Rimfang Wolf and Trifarian Glory Seeker. So I think that this deck has its weakest matchup against really control-y decks like War Mother or Karma. And what you want to do with this deck is basically never summon a Trifarian Glory Seeker, never summon an Iceveil Archer without the opponent having something on the board, and on the opening hand, you want to keep your Hearthguard if you can, a Babbling Beard. You want to be keeping your bigger units that can't be taken out by small little things like Mystic Shots or Vile Feasts, because a lot of your other units are 1 health, and you want to play your Avaros and Hearthguard and your Omen Hawk so you can build up the health of those units so they can take more than 2 or 3 damage. Alright guys, so that's going to do it for the deck analysis portion. If you guys are enjoying this video, please leave a like, thumbs up. It really helps me out because this is a pretty small channel. If you guys have any strategies that I missed, if you guys play these decks differently, or if there's anything else you guys want to hear me talk about, feel free to leave it in the comments section. Alright, so now we're going to spend just a brief moment talking about Frostbite and how to use Frostbite effectively. So remember, Frostbite is a fleeting effect that only lasts for 1 turn. You don't want to be using Frostbite just to block damage on your Nexus. If you're going to be playing a FRELJORD deck, very often your health is going to be dipping below 10 health pretty much every game. You want to be using your health as a resource. You want to be using Frostbite to get favorable trades with your opponent. In general, Frostbite effects are pretty cheap compared to other effects, so if you can trade a Brittle Steel for a Prismatic Barrier, then you're going to be in better shape than your opponent. Generally, you don't want to play actively with Frostbite. You want to play more passively and use it as a reaction to something that your opponent does. Okay, and that's all the shit I'm going to give you guys for Frostbite. I feel like you're going to learn a lot about how to use Frostbite just watching this video. And now we're going to move on to the real reason you guys are watching this video, I bet. It's to figure out which champions are the best, to figure out which cards in FRELJORD are the best, and which cards I need to use to win. Obviously, I'm not the be-all end-all source of information on Runeterra. This is all just the opinions and ideas of one master ranked player, and I think a lot of the beauty in card games is when players are able to figure out the best strategies that work for them personally, because everyone's play style is a little bit different. And I just want to use this as a resource for you guys to develop your skills more fundamentally. If you're an advanced player, this tier list is probably not going to have very much value to you. But if you're a newer player and you want to get a better idea of what cards have good general value, you will benefit more from this. And as the weeks go by that this video is up, it gets less and less relevant as patch updates and meta changes happen, so keep that in mind. All disclaimers aside, FRELJORD is a pretty weak region with its champions in general. It's very rare I feel I'm building a deck and I say, wow, you know what could really just make this overall better if I just add a fucking Braum. No, you build your decks around the champions in FRELJORD. The champions in FRELJORD aren't really splashable. So let's just go from worst to best champions. So starting at the worst, I think it's a pretty easy decision to consider Anivia the worst champion in FRELJORD. And it might be surprising because on the surface it could be kind of impressive to see that if you have a level 10, if you have a enlightened Anivia, you can deal 14 damage in one hit plus the 3 attack that she has. So it's just not very often that you're gonna really get the full effect of Anivia. A problem with late game champions, I think, is when you're playing a deck that's revolving around a champion, you want to have 3 of that champion in general. And if you have 3 Anivias, it's a high probability that by turn 5, you're going to draw an Anivia that you can't really use until at least turn 7, and in a lot of cases, you're not going to want to play her until turn 10. So you've got this card in your hand that doesn't really have that much value, and then if you take into consideration that you're not summoning the Anivia, you might have double Anivias in your hand, or you might summon an Anivia and now you have a Harsh Winds, which is kind of a cool card, but the effects of Harsh Winds only last 1 turn, and Anivia doesn't have a lot of attack. So Harsh Winds is kind of hard to use with an Anivia deck in most cases, because you're not really going to be playing that many units, you're just going to want to survive as long as possible. There are a few decks obviously that can use Anivia really well, the premier one being War Mother Control, and I think that there is a lot to do with some Rekindle or Revive that's coupled with Mist's Call that can be pretty okay. I think Trend is just overall a better card than Anivia, because Anivia can get more value than pretty much any champion over the long run, but it's hard to make the game go into the long run. It's hard to draw out the game with Anivia, and it takes so long for her to be good that I just don't think she's really worth it in pretty much every deck except for War Mothers. And coming up next, we got your boy Braum. And it pains me to say this because I like Braum's design, I like the mechanics of his gameplay, and he can generate infinite value with 1 3-mana card, which is really cool. I think the problem with Braum though is you need to build the deck completely around him. Like the Scar cards, the ones that when they survive damage they get attack, he can do really well in those decks, and I think that once we get Sejuani, he might also be good in that type of deck. I feel like one of the biggest problems with Braum is you want him to get big. You want to build him up and increase his attack by a good amount. And it's really easy, especially against Ionia or Shadow Isles, to just kill him or call him. And the deck that you're building to play the Braum is a deck that doesn't really have very many options in interacting with the enemy's board. So you'll run like increased health items, increased stat items, but you won't run a lot of damage to enemy items. You won't be running items like single combat, like Mystic Shot, because you just won't be running a Demacia or a Piltover deck. I haven't seen it work, at least pretty much unanimously. If you're playing Braum, you're playing Braum Noxus. and that leads you to have one really powerful tool, Whirling Death, to deal with enemy attacks and interact with the enemy, but basically that's it. I feel like Noxian Fervor is going to go really well with Braum, but we'll just have to wait and see. And next up on our list, we've got Ashe. I'd say Ashe is like pretty mid-tier as a champion. There's a lot of things that she can do well. She's pretty offensive. I'd say Ashe is pretty mid-tier as a champion. She is good as an offensive champion, especially when you can play her on a turn 4 or turn 5 and get a nice open attack. Couple her with a challenger unit or quick attack units. She could be pretty nice. I feel like the best deck Ashe can be used in is the one that was discussed earlier in the video, the Ashe mid-range Frostbite. And besides that, I haven't really seen a good deck to use her in. We'll see if Sejuani ends up changing that. Unfortunately, she has some weaknesses with swarmy spider decks, and those are pretty common. She does pretty well against Demacia Bannerman, and I think with the newest patch update, that deck's strength is going down a little bit, so Ashe's strength is also kind of going down a little bit. And last, we've got Tryndamere. So I think Tryndamere is probably the best Freljord champion currently, even though there's not very many decks that can work with him. I think the strength of Tryndamere is if you can summon him with another effect, he turns into a really good value, especially as a 9/9 with Overwhelm. If you get a Mist's Call, if you get a Thresh summon, if you get a Spectral Matron, if you get a Rekindler, there's a lot of ways to get Thresh back out onto the field, Harrowing. So I think that in general, the best region to pair with Tryndamere is going to be Shadow Isles. I just wish Tryndamere was in Shadow Isles. I think that Tryndamere's biggest weakness is his susceptibility to... He's a giant beat stick, right? So it's really easy to just kill him with any kind of board removal. And I think once you get him, like, recalls are his biggest enemy. So basically, I think what holds Tryndamere back, as well as pretty much every Freljord champion, is you need to be very specific with what deck you use when you want to play Tryndamere. And there isn't, like, you need to have something that allows you to resummon Tryndamere. Because overall, as just a 8 cost, 8/4 with a revive that turns him into a 9/9, he is not a strong champion. But when you're able to revive him cheaply and like efficiently, and you're just able to revive him over and over again, that's when his value starts to really add up. And his Overwhelm with the high attack turns him into a great late game finisher. And even though she's not released, I'm going to make a prediction and say that Sejuani is by far going to be the best Freljord champion. I don't know if it's going to be right. I think that she has a lot of... I think that her level up is not very difficult, especially when we're able to see the new cards that we're being given, like Ember Maiden, like Noxian Fervor, like Gotcha, just like a lot of the new cards that are coming out. Imperial Demolitionist, City Breaker. I feel like Sejuani is going to be a good match to go with Swain. And if you guys are coming to this video for my opinion, now you know what I think the tier list is sort of for champions. Anivia sort of at the bottom, and then Tryndamere closer to the top, with Sejuani topping that off. There's so many cards that it's going to be really difficult for me to go in depth into each one. So I'm just going to throw the tier list up here, and I'll kind of go through some explanations on some of the cards. And if you guys have disagreements on some of them, feel free to give your ideas in the comments. I really want to hear what you guys think about this. I really want to hear what your guys' opinions are regarding these cards, what you think should be higher up, what you think should be lower down on this list, what you've had success with, because I'm still learning this game as you guys are, and there's going to be things that I think are really bad and that inevitably turn out to be really good. Maybe Sejuani is going to be a shitty champion, who knows? So whatever your guys' thoughts are, I'd love to hear it in the comments. So the way that I'm going to be structuring this part of the video is I'm just going to throw the tier list on, and I'm going to show you guys a tier list for constructed, and then I'm going to show you a tier list for expedition, and I'm just going to sort of describe the cards that I think are important and some cards that I have some strong opinions on, and how they differ between constructed and between expedition. So as you guys notice, there's Mighty Poro, Alpha Wild Claw. These are just kind of beat stick monsters that are not really good in constructed because there's a lot better options. Alpha Wild Claw costs 2 less than Tryndamere, but why not just play Tryndamere if you're going to play Alpha Wild Claw? I think that overall Poros are pretty underwhelming in constructed and Heart of the Fluffed. Even though it's a cool card, I encourage you guys to try to build a deck around it, but it's just not that good. Avarosan Outriders, the Allegiance card for FRELJORD, is really good if it was good to play a whole FRELJORD deck, but FRELJORD just doesn't have enough cards to make a mono FRELJORD deck. And Treat is like a pay 2 mana to draw 1 card, but then you're losing card advantage because you're using 1 card to gain 1 card in your hand, and it's basically just adding a cost of 2 to any champion you want to play. So I don't see it getting any play unless maybe in a Maokai deck, because Maokai is so important in the upcoming patch. She Who Wanders is not very good because it's just a 10-10 beat stick that can obliterate 4 units, and like it can obliterate your units. It's really hard to build a deck over it because there's so many ways to kill it, there's so many ways to move it, and it's so expensive. Winter's Breath might be something you can play with Karma maybe to get that double, to get that Raigeki effect where you kill all your opponent's field. I don't really see Karma doing too well in FRELJORD decks at the moment though, so that one's kind of difficult. Lonely Poro is probably going to be the only Poro card that's really useful because it gives you an extra card in hand. It gives you that +1 card, so you're basically playing 1 card to get 1 in your hand, and then you can use that to discard. You can use a Poro Herder with it. I really like the card. I think Scar Thane Stefan can be a good card in like a Vlad deck or in a Braum deck where you're just trying to inflict a little bit of damage to these guys. That has something that has potential. Babbling Beard is cool because it's also a +1. I think cards that give you an additional card in your hand overall have better value in general because you're getting like a free card in advance to this card, so you're getting more value in the long run. Brittle Steel is a nice combat trick that's really cheap that can throw your opponent off. Starlit Seer I think is really good. Here's a 2/3, but you can get a +1/+1 for each spell that you cast. So if you cast 2 spells, then you're getting a +2/+2 for a 2/2/3. So I think like the stats end up working out really well. Catalyst is basically needed in ramp decks because it allows you to survive while also giving you that +1 mana, which basically makes Anivia more viable as a champion. Avalanche is needed against aggro decks because it does 2 to everything. I think that it's really nice when you're on defense and you just want to clear the board. Omen Hawk is super good because it's a 1/1/1 that gives +1/+1 to 2 other allies, so it's basically a 1/3/3 when you just look at its stats, so it's super efficient. Avarosan Sentry just gives you an extra card, so it's always useful unless it's like a 3 mana cost, unless they nerf it. Icefell Archer is good on offense as well as defense, and yeah. The champion tier list for expeditions goes as follows, with Anivia still at the bottom, Ashe second to bottom, Trynd second best, and Braum the best by far in expeditions. I've had so much success with Braum in expeditions, and now we're gonna discuss the tier list in expeditions, and I'm just gonna go over what cards have major jumps in viability. So basically, I don't think that Yetis are very strong in expeditions. I've never had a successful Yeti deck personally, and I know that people say Alpha Wild Claw is a good expeditions card, but I've just never had success with it. It might, I don't know, maybe it belongs in like a C tier or B tier, I don't know. Me personally, I've never had success with it. I freaking hate it when I have to pick this card up. In general, Poros are a little bit more viable in expeditions from what I've seen. Poro Snacks is an awesome ability if you do have a Poro deck. Part of the Fluff is good as a 1 or 2 of. And then if you have a Braum with Poros, which you normally do, that just adds to the viability. In general, when you're playing expeditions, you don't need to worry about if your opponent has a deny, if your opponent has specific cards that are removal. If I'm going up against Ionia, I don't need to think in the back of my head, oh, this Will of Ionia is going to destroy me, or oh, this Deny is going to mess me up. I can play, you have to play more freely, like you just don't know what your opponent has in most cases when you're going to be successful in expeditions. I think that in general, cards that buff up a unit a lot, like Take Heart, like Battle Fury, are really good. I think that War Mother's Call is really good because you don't really need to worry about denying. It's like less common to get it. That's why I think Pack Mentality is better up here. And I think in general, the smaller the buffs, the worse they are, and the bigger the buffs, the better they are in this. I think that ramp is super dumb in expeditions. I've never had a good expeditions ramp deck, and I encourage you guys to try whatever you like in expeditions. This is just sort of my experience. And basically what I think is by far the strongest card in expeditions is Avaros and Hearthguard, because it's harder for the opponent to have combos that kill you. So if you have an Avaros and Hearthguard early in expeditions, I always pick it up, and then I always try to pick up every other Avaros and Hearthguard that I have, and then I'll try to make sure that I have a few 1, 2, 3 drops and maybe an avalanche, something that controls the board against aggro to make sure that the game goes on longer than it should. And that's what I think is the best way to play a long game. And in general, in expedition, stats are worth more than effects and battle tricks. Like, it's better to have a buff than it is to have a flash freeze, in my opinion. And yeah, there you guys have it. It took me a while to make this video. It's super long. I tried to have all the pictures of cards up on the screen as I talked about them, but halfway in the video I was like, fuck this is taking too long. So you could see the level of effort kind of went down the further you get into the video. But I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys learned something. And if you guys have any disagreements, if you guys have any thoughts, if you guys think I'm an idiot for using some of these cards, please let me know. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions. If there's any other kind of sections that you guys want me to cover, if there's something that you guys didn't like in the video, I like all the feedback you guys have, and I really appreciate it. Alright, you guys, so that's going to be it for this one. Have a great rest of your day. So let's see, I just put this here, I got my enemy out, we're at the end game. I think I win this. I don't think there's any way for him to do enough Oh my fucking god! How does he always have an answer to everything I have? How, dude? It doesn't make any fucking sense!